Clarissa, who was chasing Leticia away, crushing her to her heart's content, raised a sharp eyebrow. Then she nudged her husband, William, who was standing next to her, with his elbow, as if she asked her husband for his last word for Leticia. William looked at Leticia with a grin and walked out as if he had been waiting. He said with mock sympathy, reached out, and touched Leticia's frozen shoulder. It was too sticky to be attributed to her father-in-law. William's hands always had a strong smell of phosphatic liquid. This was because his noble hobby was none other than taking pictures. Clarissa wasn't a terrible mother-in-law from the beginning. Although she was picky, she did not bother Leticia on purpose. Until one day, she accidentally picked up a photo that had fallen out of William's vest pocket. There was a picture of Leticia changing her clothes. He may have bribed Leticia's maid or snuck in through a crack in her door to take her pictures. However, upon seeing this, Clarissa's anger was completely directed toward Leticia, accused her of seducing William. Clarissa, who tore the photos into pieces and threw them in Leticia's face, changed her attitude as if she were acting this whole time. She could proudly walk around the city arm in arm with her son's mistress to humiliate Leticia. Of course, this made Leticia's position even more ridiculous. The words William said barely reached Leticia's ears. No sooner had he finished his tedious admonition than Clarissa dragged her husband back and left. Leticia had no choice but to look at their backs in confusion as they walked away. She was thrown out before even signing her divorce papers. As if Clarissa had been waiting for this time, she packed all of Leticia's belongings and put them out. In the end, Leticia had never been family to them. She realized that fact only after being abandoned by the one she called family. She dragged her frozen sore feet in the middle of this cold winter. She saw a wagon waiting at the entrance of the Winchester mansion. It seemed like that was the last favor that Clarissa was talking about. It was a wagon, not even a simple carriage but a shabby wagon that was only used by commoners to transport crops. Leticia's belongings, haphazardly stacked and packed, were extremely messy, but the amount was too small. As she remembers, when she got married, it was much more than this. It was then. Ice-cold water was poured on the head of Leticia, who was standing at a distance. She was defenseless and drenched in water and was terrified. Aside from the cold, the musty smell of the water stung her nose. When she reflexively looked up to where the water had fallen, she saw a woman standing triumphantly on the third-floor balcony. A woman holding a bucket in one hand covered her mouth with the other hand and pretended to be sorry. It was none other than Leticia's sister-in-law, Olivier. Olivier usually pretended to be very weak and didn't even lift anything heavier than a fork. But she even carried a bucket to pour water on herself. Leticia was completely stunned with her sincere malice. Olivier, seeing Leticia looking like a wet mouse, made a pretentious fuss. It's not that it wasn't, as she said, every time the cold wind blew, the moisture on her skin felt like it was prickling like an ice needle. The cold was so extreme that it was painful. She had already been outside for a long time, and it was clear that she would get hypothermia at this rate. Only then did Leticia realize, why is her luggage on the wagon so small? It was clear that Olivier had failed to correct her habit again and stole her things. There was clear evidence before her eyes. Leticia's teeth chattered from the cold, and she pointed to Olivier's dress with her delicate hand. The light apricot-colored skirt, sprinkled with golden pearls, was unseasonably bright. It was a memento passed down by Leticia's grandmother. She is the person who raised Leticia in place of her mother, a socialite, Elizabeth. Sadly, the grandmother did not see her granddaughter's wedding but left her the dress as a keepsake. A rare dress made from fabric imported from the distant continent of Istria. It was such a waste that all she did was take it out of the box occasionally and barely wore it on her wedding day. Olivier, who had her parents on her back, always acted as she pleased. And now, she even reached out to her grandmother's belongings, taking advantage of Leticia's abandonment and helplessness. Olivier, waving her hands like a paper doll, rushed inside preparing to greet the new guest she was talking about. The woman who drove Aster so crazy that he even decided to divorce her. She is the woman who will bear Aster's child, which Leticia cannot bear herself. When Leticia thought of the two of them standing affectionately, her heart felt like it was burning. Leticia was drenched in dirt, frozen solid, and slumped down in her seat with a shabby appearance. The Winchester family's servants rushed out as if they had been waiting inside and touched her body. They stroked Leticia's limp limbs and placed her in the wagon. The coachman, who was a day laborer, watched the scene with an indifferent face. The carriage departed at the same time as the door closed, carrying all of her pain that was piled up inside. Leticia's stepmother, Xenia, who heard the whole situation, asked with an astonished look on her face. But strangely, the corner of her mouth is raised. After Xenia's ex-husband passed away, she came into the Violette family as a second wife. But her position was ruined when Leticia's father, Graham, committed suicide. Xenia, who had lost her second husband, did not welcome her stepdaughter. She blames Leticia for Graham's suicide, which caused the ruin of the Violette family, all because she married Aster, whom she loved with all her heart. Leticia opened her trembling lips and retorted. It was truly amazing. She was the daughter-in-law of the Winchesters until yesterday, and now she is not even the daughter of the Violettes. She couldn't say anything in front of Xenia, who was glaring at her sharply. Each word flew like an arrow and pierced Leticia's heart. When Xenia saw Leticia's pale face, she snorted. She didn't mind seeing Leticia still shivering from the cold or her face showing signs of being beaten. At the time, with her lowered voice, Xenia mentioned her younger sister, who died of illness a few years ago. Like a snake lurking just before it bites, Xenia whispered cruelly, telling Leticia to get out of her house. When Leticia came out, the wagon had already left. When she saw the luggage rolling around like horse manure on the dirt floor, she laughed like a crazy person. There was no place to go and no one to help, so there was no one to help. The faces of several friends appeared in Leticia's mind. Before her marriage, they were quite close, but now they have lost all contact. It was because she went around borrowing investment money like a bigot to help Aster. What a foolish Leticia. Laughing at herself, she walked past the pile of luggage. It was trash that she couldn't carry by herself. Her clothes, which had gotten wet once and then dried, were crumpled and rustling, and her half-loosened hair was blowing in the wind. Leticia, who had passed the Violette's mansion with a shabby appearance, climbed up a low hill. It was a place where her family often went on picnics when she was young. The place where her happiest memories were held. When she stood on it, she could see the entire deep blue Elle River. Leticia thought as she gazed at the river that gurgled without freezing even in the middle of winter. It would be easier to throw herself to the river. A cold voice flew towards her from behind. It was Aster. He was standing there, his beautiful black hair blowing in the strong wind. Leticia bit her lip and glanced at his handsome face. She saw his longing and hateful face. If Aster had been alone, maybe he would have come to get her again because he regrets abandoning her. But as always, he was not alone. Aster stretched out his hand and helped someone down on a horse. He had to be careful with the woman's hands, fearing that they might break if he held it incorrectly, or that it might fly away if the wind blew on it. It was a clear contrast to his attitude when he slapped Leticia in the face a few hours ago. The beauty who fell into his arms smiled like the spring sunlight, Leonka Snowwither. She was a disgustingly pretty mistress who stole Aster from Leticia. Aster pointed a finger at Leticia and asked worriedly. Looking at Leonka, he spoke as if she were about to deal with a rabid wild dog that never knew when it might bite her. Leonka nodded and whispered something in his ear, convincing Aster that she should talk to Leticia. Aster stepped back with a disapproving expression. Leticia watched the scene with her amazed eyes. Aster is a stubborn man. During their 3 years of marriage, he had never once lost to Leticia. But for his mistress, he never won. It seems like it's a given. Aster, who gave the last request, glanced towards her. It was a warning to her not to even dream of daring to harm Leonka, as how she once loved those wintry silver-gray eyes. His frost-like gaze was so miserable that her entire imagination collapsed. Leticia's knees felt as if they would collapse as well, but she managed to grit her teeth and hold on. Her last pride was not wanting to look ugly in front of Leonka. The scent of flowers tickled her nose, and at the same time, something fluttered around her shoulder. When she lowered her head, a dark blue shawl appeared. Leonka, who personally took off her shawl, with her sweet voice asked kindly. As if that wasn't enough, she even grabbed Leticia's hand with both hands and rubbed it. Her attitude was as innocent and pure as that of a child who believes that only goodwill exists in the world. Leticia looked at Leonka's delicate face close to her nose. Her pink eyes, with slightly drooping ends of long eyelashes, were as beautiful as cherry blossoms in April. How great it would be if you could reach out and crush it. The damn bitch who stole someone else's husband with that kind-looking face said. Her deer-like eyes were stained with moist tears, asking Leticia for her time. But Leticia flatly refused. She was not stupid, and she had a feeling that what Leonka was going to say would be shit. It was then. Leonka, who corrected her shaking eyes at her firm refusal, grabbed her arm and whispered. She brought up Leticia's father's death. Leticia couldn't believe her ears for a moment and turned her head immediately, glaring at her. The words that came out of Leonka's lips with her girlish expression were extremely shocking. Leonka whispered in a voice that Aster could never hear, clapping her hands softly and laughing, mocking her. Talking about her father who recently passed away was nothing short of disgusting to her. But why is Leonka mentioning this? Leonka, whose eyes were as round as a rabbit, scanned her bruised face and sarcastically said. Yet her expression was as clear as if she knew nothing, giving her goosebumps. Leticia's eyes became fierce as she felt like she was being teased. Then Aster, who was watching from afar, leaned towards her as if he would come running at any moment. Leonka, looking sideways in Aster's direction, calmed him down, suggested patronizingly. Leticia bit her lip, trying to calm her emotions, and glared at the back of Leonka walking ahead. Since she seduced a married man, Leticia knew that Leonka was not an innocent woman. However, when encountered her in person, her true colors were beyond her imagination. The face of an angel, the innocence of a child, and the cunning of a devil come together. Anyway, she had to admit that Leonka was creepy and cunning. Since her dead father was mentioned, she had no choice but to follow Leonka's wishes. She followed Leonka, clenching her hands so tightly that her fingernails were digging. There was no topic for her and Aster's mistress to talk about warmly, so the only noise between them was the chilly river breeze and the sound of flowing water. When the two stopped, this was the moment Leonka stopped and looked back. Leticia, who had been waiting for this moment, swung her hand without hesitation. She couldn't bear having her husband taken away from her. Anyway, Aster, who was attracted to the topic of married men, was the same trash. However, she could not forgive her for carelessly talking about her poor father and calling him father. Leonka's face of genuine surprise, not acting, was quite comical. As she looked at this, she felt refreshed, as if a lot of the congestion on her had disappeared. Thanks to this, Leticia calmed down and looked at her with her arms crossed. In response, Leonka bit her dainty lip. Leticia thought she would get angry because she got hit, but unexpectedly, she started laughing. Leonka smiled brightly, not caring that her hair was getting disheveled by the river wind. And she asked, wiping away the tears from the corners of her eyes, starting to bring up the reason for Leticia's father's suicide, about his will that he left before he died. Graham, the heads of a family tended to write a will in advance. It was in preparation for an emergency. If the content needed to be modified, a lawyer was called in each time to revise it. As his only successor, Leticia watched by his side every time. After Graham committed suicide, the will that was made public was exactly as she remembered it. And that is what she believes it. But now, Leonka said that the will of her father had changed. Leticia gritted her teeth. She was just about to get angry and ask her if she was kidding. She said that his will was amended, and all of the wealth and assets of Violette's family were supposed to be down to Leticia, and her family lawyer already knew about this. It wasn't a very difficult guess. After her younger sister died, her father had only one child left, Leticia. Leonka asked, putting her finger in front of her lips as if she were playing a riddle. If his deceased father failed to amend the will before his death, who benefits the most? It was her stepmother, Xenia. Xenia was originally a local noblewoman who was a distant relative of the Violette family. She was already poor, but when her husband died of illness, she was left with nowhere to take her young son. Leticia's father, who just happened to be divorced, felt sorry for Xenia. Even though she was his wife in name only, he went so far as to take her as her second wife and let her live in her Violette mansion. If her father had changed his will, Xenia would not have gotten a penny. She didn't just take over Count Violette and show off like she does now. Leonka brought out the suspicions that were already stirring in Leticia's heart. Leticia covered her mouth with her hand at the worst assumption. She may have been playing with her, but a part of her knew it. The fact is that what she says is quite credible. Her father's second wife, Xenia, could have poisoned his teacup and faked his symptoms as illness. It wouldn't have been that difficult to fake the scene as a suicide, like she has done to her ex-husband. After hearing this, Leticia's mind was a mess. The last thing she saw of her father before he was put in the coffin was a dark, leaden face. No matter how much makeup and grooming the undertaker put on his face, there was still a trace of pain that couldn't be hidden on his face. She clung to the edge of her father's coffin and writhed like a mad woman. She was half out of her mind, crying and crying, begging for her mistakes and begging her dead father to come back. She can't believe that Xenia was behind her father's death. She killed him. Leonka's face as she said that was so confident that it was obnoxious. Her attitude was so unbelievable that it was a lie. Leticia opened her lips, shaking in shock, and barely managed to ask why she was telling her all about this. To put it bluntly, Leonka and her husband had a romantic relationship. So, she had no reason to be kind. In particular, to reveal such a sensitive truth, Leonka will also have to take the risk of becoming an exposer. However, Leonka smiled brightly as if she had been waiting for just now. She answered cheerfully and looked around. She came close to Leticia as if she was concerned about her hearing ears. First, because she hates Xenia, who's been trying to seduce Aster for a long time, even took her clothes off herself in front of him. Leonka, who pretended to cover her eyes and giggled, shrugged her shoulders. As she came too close, Leticia unconsciously backed away little by little. It was a defensive instinct that usually comes out when someone you don't like approaches you. Leonka lowered her eyes secretly and whispered with a neat face. Her voice was extremely insidious. Second, she just hates Leticia and she wants her to fall. At the same time as she said those words, Leticia's heart stopped. At first, it was horrifyingly cold, and then pain as hot as fire penetrated Leticia's body. Leticia looked down with her mouth open in shock. A sharp dagger was seen sticking deep into her chest. With her pretty smiling face, Leonka, who stabbed her, whispered sweetly. And then she pushed Leticia's body with all her might into the cold river.